Deputy Clerk, can you confirm we have quorum present?
We do.
Thank you. So we're calling the meeting to order at 10:37. Are there any agendas to, any additions to the agenda?
Yeah, I was wondering if this is where we add under new business.
Strictly speaking, that's already on the agenda. So if you have a matter arising that would fall under new business, we don't need to amend the agenda itself. We can just bring it up on section 8.
Okay, we just put that in when we get there.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Great. All right. Any other thoughts about that? Seeing none, there are no additions to the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Pat? And I'm only seeing part of looking for a second hand up. Anybody? Oh, there we go. Thank you. Councillor Lovshin, second. All in favor? Contrary of any? The agenda is approved. Declaration of pecuniary interests. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest arising from today's meeting? Seeing a lot of head shaking and nobody saying yes, we will say there are 0 disclosures of pecuniary interest. Presentations. Okay, so that's where Judy comes in. Maybe with your forbearance, we will postpone section 5, awaiting Judy's arrival. Move on to section 6 of the agenda, approval of the previous minutes. I move that the minutes of the January 21st, 2021 meeting of the Environmental Climate Change Advisory Committee be adopted. Is there a seconder? Faye, I think you had your hand up first. Any comments, errors or omissions arising from the minutes? I take that as a no. All right. All those in favor of the motion to approve the minutes? Contrary, if any? Carried. Thank you. All right, where we got here? Any business arising from the previous meeting? So we had tentatively talked about a meeting schedule that would include meetings in March, May, August, and December. Are there any further thoughts on that, or are there any other matters arising from the minutes in the last meeting?
If I may, Chairman Gilchrist, we at the last meeting, the committee indicated that they're going to meet the 4th Monday of every month. Excuse me, but for the March meeting that was identified, we actually set it as the 5th Monday. So we're just looking for clarification on which date in March. And then also in May and December, the 4th Mondays of those months fall on a statutory holiday. And then there's, we actually don't meet any, we don't have any meetings during the month of August in the entire township. So just wanted to get the committee's input on which dates we actually want to set for 3 of those 4 months.
Good batting average there. Okay. You've heard the challenge. The first one would be the next meeting. I guess we could have just as easily said the last Monday of each month instead of pick a number. But Faye, was your hand up there?
Yeah, we had decided that we were going to be meeting monthly and so it would seem to me that we would have to put in like April, June, and July in here as well.
We have those dates already set. If these were the 4 that were
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Sure.
This minor points, but some direction from the committee. Oh, Pat, I was just going to say, do you want the 4th?
I was going to say, I have no problem with it being just set as the last Monday of the month. I know that for me that works, and that way it's just always in my head.
Okay. Any contrary opinion? Yes, Kate.
Sometimes that might be an issue because we have our coordinator meetings the first Monday and Tuesday of the month, but depending on how it falls, sometimes we have to backdate into the last week of the previous month. So that may, for whatever, that would be probably more impactful for Councillor Loveshin because his coordinator meetings fall on the Mondays.
I'm okay, Pat, because, or, sorry, Kate, because mine aren't until the afternoon.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus there, that the terminology will be the last Monday. And now, Emily, you had said though that we have at least 2 holidays. What should our rule be in that case? The previous week?
If you're moving it to the last Monday, I don't believe that will affect it.
It would for December. Well,
It would.
27th of December, I don't know. I don't know. Is that a holiday or not? Because Boxing Day is on the Sunday.
I think we could probably dispense with the meeting to give everyone a break the month of December, but or leave it at the call of the chair if something urgent arises as of our November meeting. But I think certainly this far in advance, it wouldn't hurt us to just say we'll pass on the month of December. But again, I take direction from the committee.
Okay.
I would agree with that, Mr. Chair, and I would also ask for May being a month that we would miss, because I know myself and I know a few of the other farmers in the group here are going to have a tough time in maybe the month of May.
That's reasonable. And if we have moved to fill April and June, I think we're already quite aggressively pursuing whatever challenges are before us in terms of presenting a platform for the people. Faye?
I would like to actually, because we're just getting started now, I mean, we're already, we're just getting started. I would like to meet in May, and if people can't, come for that meeting, I mean, absences, I mean, that's a good reason to have an absence if you're farming and you're really busy, I mean, that's certainly understandable. I just think that, getting started, if we go for like 60 days without a meeting, that's a long period of time. That's just my feeling.
Any other thoughts from anyone? Because we do have a number of farmers on this committee. Pat?
I'm wondering if we leave that decision at least till April, or leave it as needed at the call of the chair, because I was thinking as you that we're not sure exactly how many people that will impact in May. I'm assuming Mark and Mark for sure, but I'm not sure about others. And I understand Faye's point, but I think there has to be a balance.
Okay, I'm happy to take that suggestion, Pat, and we will tentatively put a meeting date, but we will not confirm it until the April meeting that in fact there will be a meeting in May. And the compromise might be that if we have an opportunity to have a presentation from someone that the 2 Marks wouldn't feel all that uncomfortable missing, we might still have value in getting together. We'll just make a commitment not to make any decisions in their absence of any policy or procedural matters. So, but we'll deal with that when we get to April. Okay, so I think, Madam Deputy Clerk, does that address all of your concerns?
Yes, so we're going to stick with the 29th of March for our next meeting then,
Yes.
as the last Monday. Okay.
Okay.
Chairman,
Yes, Kate.
Yeah, just for clarity purposes, at the last meeting, we were talking about the frequency that was set up in the terms of reference, which was the committee shall endeavor to meet 6 times a year. But as Faye had said at the last meeting, that because we're just getting started, then there had to be a greater meeting frequency to get the committee rolling. After that meeting, the deputy clerk and I looked at the terms of reference and made the decision we're not amending the terms of reference, because it also says that if it is not necessary to meet this often, or if it is necessary to meet more frequently, the meeting shall be held at the call of the chair in consultation with the clerk. And so we've already had that discussion. So there's no need to change the terms of reference the committee has said they want to meet more frequently to get this committee rolling. And I think that was agreed upon by all the members and the chair.
I have every faith you're going to keep us on the straight and narrow, Madam Clerk. Thank you very much. I
Okay.
appreciate that reflection. And so we are joined by Judy now. Good morning, Judy.
Good morning. Sorry, I was in a different office server and had some difficulty opening up Zoom. So I'm back.
Well, it's fine. We were able to just fill the time until you got here. We certainly understand the high-tech challenges, the new ways of meeting. But
Working from home.
indeed, but that does take us to your presentation, section 5 of today's agenda. And so the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen, which I haven't done recently. So let's see.
Sorry, Judy, it should be, I've shared the presentation for you, so I can just,
oh,
yeah, I can just scroll it through for you if
That's
you'd like.
yours. Thank you. That's great. Okay, so we spent the summer, Josh Wessel, who is the UOIT or a excuse me, Ontario Tech fourth year student, and myself going over the inventory and preparing it for Hamilton Township. And this is an overview of what we had, plus commentary from me. And it's called 10 Years to Flatten the Curve. Next slide, please. So this is the greenhouse gas inventory and reduction target that Hamilton Township has going forward. Next slide, please. So some of you may have seen some of this information in the past, but it is something that we all should keep in mind, that implementing the carbon future of our children is already in effect. And greenhouse gas emissions, actually, I can't see it all. Is it possible to make it a little small? Or maybe I can cancel the pictures. No. Okay, that's a bit better. It's not really a choice. It's already implicit in everything we do. And what's important is that we exercise the power that we have now over the next 10 years. Our current path is illustrated in the next slide. These are some of the impacts that have happened to smaller communities in rural areas over the last few years. We've had everything from tornadoes, several tornadoes, to droughts. Port Hope has experienced something sooner in 1980 with the major flood they had. And although they've corrected the problem with the Ganaraska River, now we're having problems with Lake Ontario seeping into the mouth of the Ganaraska River and causing floods that way. Wildfires are going to continue also to be a problem. And the impacts of wildfires can cover thousands of miles. You can smell and be affected by the pollution of forest fires from northern Quebec down all the way to the eastern seaboard of the United States. Next slide, please. So locally, this is what I have taken from the Canadian Climate Atlas. The red line shows the impact of heat waves that are going to be upon us based on our current trajectory if we don't do anything more than we are currently doing. And so these are very hot days, greater than 30 degrees Celsius. And the solid black line is the average. And you can see there's a lot of variability. But by 2100, we'll have on average 70 days over 30 degrees Celsius. And so that's just one of the impacts we're going to have to start preparing for now. Next slide, please. So the corporate energy use in Hamilton Township is mainly from buildings and vehicles. And you can see the range of fuels. Vehicles have a higher impact because they're all fossil fuels, even though the building side is bigger, it has less fossil fuel in its composition of energy and fuels. So its greenhouse gas implications are smaller. Next slide. And you can see, sorry, also that there's very little there related to streetlights and water pumping and so on. And that pretty much holds the same for the community at large. Passenger vehicles and residences make up almost all of the greenhouse gas emissions and energy. So you can see that electricity makes up a large portion of energy use. But again, because of vehicle fossil fuel emissions, they tend to be much greater in regard to greenhouse gases. And there's very little with regard to commercial and industrial in Hamilton Township in terms of emissions. So in terms of energy expenses in the community as a whole, where it's costing about $54 million for fuel and electricity, or close to 55 million. Township operations are 1% of that, 584,000. And that holds across the board for greenhouse gas emissions and for energy use. The township's own operations only make up 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions and of the energy use of the township. Next slide. So the reduction target that has been established for municipalities that have joined the Partners for Climate Protection program of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is the same target that the province of Ontario and the federal government have established. That's reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below what they were in 2005, and doing that by 2030. So the community target is just under 23,000 tons, which is equivalent to close to 5,000 passenger vehicles driven for 1 year. That's how much we have to reduce our emissions for the Hamilton Township as a whole. And on the corporate side, the target is 239 tons that we have to reduce or eliminate. And that's equivalent to just under 28 homes, the use of energy of 28 homes in 1 year. So you can see that the emphasis is really going to be on the community at large and what we can do. Next slide, please. So corporate emissions, the green line is a line based on 2011 emissions and the expectation from the years following to 2013 as to what we expected greenhouse gases would increase. But you can see in 2014, it started to drop. And that's more on the building side, not on the vehicle side. And down below are the minimal amounts that are created from streetlights, water and sewage, and corporate waste. That's the private pickup from township offices. That's not the community waste pickup. So the expectation was that the target that by 2030, our emissions would be a lot higher, but you can see that they've dropped. Next slide, please. So it's not so much due to our own efforts, but due to the decarbonization of the electricity grid that in 2014, we took out coal, and by that, we reduced the carbon in the electricity system to almost zero, less than 5%. However, that is likely to change because at the currently gas-fired plants are being considered to be entered into the electric grid. And some municipalities have taken this on as a mistake, that they think the government shouldn't be putting fossil fuels back into the electricity grid. And there's a case to be made that we could discuss as to whether it's necessary. And I would say no for a number of reasons, but it's under discussion right now. Next slide, please. So one of the benefits of a low carbon future, like taking fossil fuels, coal in particular, out of the electricity system, was that smog days declined from 53 in 2005 to almost nil today. As you can see, by 2017, there were none. From 2014 on, we've hardly had any. So that's one of the co-benefits of climate change, and there are others that occur as a result of moving away from fossil fuels. Next slide, please. So another component is waste, and that's handled by the county of Northumberland. And you can see over the years to 2018, the emissions from our waste facilities, our waste collection across the county hasn't decreased. We're still producing a fair amount of methane. And hopefully there's some things in the works that you're well aware of that will mitigate this going forward. Next slide. So the waste reduction target is the same for the county, and they have to reduce waste by 8,424 tons of CO2, which is equivalent to 1,800 plus passenger vehicles driven for 1 year. And unfortunately, the way waste is picked up in the county, it crosses municipal and township borders. And so you can't get an accurate reading of what waste is generated in any particular member municipality of the county. So that's why I'm putting it in here as a whole number. Next slide. And so in this year, we're separating paper from cans and bottles. And we don't know quite yet how much we'll reduce by doing that, but it does eliminate the contamination issue, which was upwards of 30% of recyclables were being carted back to the landfill. So by separating paper from cans and bottles, that'll reduce that problem. And then, of course, we're starting organic waste pickup for composting. And it may not, from other areas that do composting, it might eliminate over 50% of organic matter. But hopefully it'll do even better than that. But things such as Kleenex and paper towels and so on can all go in the compost. And there will be a period of a few years while people get used to knowing what they can put in, which is usually more than they think. Next slide, please. Okay, so one other major way the county can mitigate climate change from waste, which is the county's biggest source of emissions, is to flare methane from the Brighton landfill site to turn it to CO2, because methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's usually measured over a 100-year time frame, but it actually is released almost completely in 20 to 25 years. And that means if you use that time frame, it's 80 times more potent than CO2. And given that we're trying to flatten the curve and keep the global average temperature below 1.5, anything we can do to mitigate against that temperature rising faster is good. So flaring methane from the landfill, which, because our landfills aren't as big as large municipalities like Toronto or Ottawa, there was no requirement for the county to flare the gas, unfortunately. And so that's something they're willing to put some thought into. It'll be quite expensive, from what I understand, in the order of about $1 million. It'll be their biggest measure by far. They can also ask for, in the next contract, for electric garbage trucks. That'll take about 6 or 7 years from now before that can be implemented, but it's being adopted in many places because they have fixed routes, and it makes sense to electrify them because they stop and start a lot. And then lastly, doing more research on biofuels and hydrogen for heavy equipment vehicles that are used in waste management, both at landfill sites and elsewhere. Next slide, please. So we will have to adapt to climate change, even if we do manage to flatten the curve. We'll all be at risk in our society and our world. The young and elderly will initially be most at risk. Next slide, please. And COVID-19 has shown that we can shift quickly if our survival is at risk. And I think beforehand, we used to think it couldn't be done, but now we've seen the whole world turn on a dime and do some rather amazing things. Climate change is going to be an even bigger challenge, because it's not like we're going to be able to end it like we can a pandemic. If we don't meet this target, we lose control. we develop feedback loops that take over, and the situation will continue to get worse with time. That's why 2030 is so important. And it's why the people who are working today, alive today, graduating from universities today, this is the generation that has to act, because anyone younger than that is going to face the consequences. Next slide. So here are some big steps Hamilton Township can take to mitigate climate change. Of course, there's education of staff on the importance of energy efficiency, recycling, composting in their daily routine at home and at work. And it can form part of the initiation when you first start a new job, and ongoing training for people who are part of the county's operations. We have to recognize and plan for heat waves in vulnerable populations, and the health unit has a climate coordinator. Unfortunately, right now she's busy with the pandemic, but for the first year she was hired, she was working on what we need to do to prepare. I also think we have to support a maximum temperature for rental accommodations, so that not just that there's a bottom, a basement temperature for when you have to have the heat on in the winter. You also will have to make sure that the climate, that the temperature doesn't exceed a certain amount in the summer, because we're going to have tremendous heat waves. Next slide. We have to educate the public in advertising and press releases. We have to help them prepare themselves for the climate risks ahead. And in terms of the buildings of the township, they have to meet a new standard of net zero. 2030 seems to be, or 2035 seems to be the target for most municipalities that they reach a net zero standard. Fleet vehicles such as electric pickups will become more available over the next 5 to 10 years. Electric pickup trucks are just coming out in about a year from now, but light vehicles and passenger vehicles are going to be phased out over the next 10 to 15 years. Okay, and then also we need to adopt on-demand microtransit with neighboring Cobourg and Port Hope. Having a service that picks people up at their house, takes them where they're going with a minimal amount of being directed elsewhere. It depends on the people in the bus, but there's no more usually than 8 to 10 at the most. It's a smaller vehicle, saves money for the community, and provides a much higher level of service. It can be accomplished either with a phone call, an app, or a website connection, and it's usually only half an hour in advance in order to receive the service. Belleville has adopted it. There's a number of communities in Canada and the US who are on this train or microtransit bus. And Cobourg has started a halfway pilot. Instead of buying big new buses, they're going to test the software out with their existing buses and bus stops. But it'll be a lot better than a fixed route approach. And the microtransit vehicles cost about 20% of the cost of a larger $500,000 bus. So they'll eventually be electric once electric vehicles and transit shuttle vehicles are more available. And having a service area that includes Hamilton Township, Port Hope, and Cobourg makes it much more friendly for people to avoid using their cars. Next slide, please. Okay, and also there's about 30% of the population that face energy poverty. That means they're paying double the amount of the median resident for on their utilities as a part of their income. And so it's quite a high number. And these are the people that can least afford to retrofit their homes for heat waves in the future, for power outages due to storms and ice storms or windstorms. And we need to set up a program that accomplishes the aspect of retrofitting homes. It's the biggest measure any community can undertake to reduce their climate emissions. And there is a project, a feasibility study that is in at FCM to look at this in the region. Again, it's Cobourg, starting in Cobourg. But it could be either an infrastructure bank that's set up, could be part of the affordable housing strategy that the county has established, and each municipality has to build its own strategy towards that. And it's something that we would do. We can discuss how this is done. It's probably going to be done at the neighborhood level with a vertically integrated operation that goes in and wraps the house and seals it and puts in heat pumps and heat recovery units, new windows and doors. If it's done as part of a mass strategy, it's a lot cheaper, and it also makes it faster, and the labor costs go down as well as the material costs. Okay, and all new housing would be built to the passive house standard. That's also underway in the county, and it would serve Hamilton Township as well. And it would be a stepped program such that by 2030, you would have net zero or passive house standards, which are 70 to 80% more fuel efficient or more energy efficient than the Ontario Building Code. So every 2 years, the standard is raised. So if you're building a house or doing a major retrofit, if you don't start it and finish it within that 2-year period, a new standard applies. And another measure is a climate risk and climate mitigation assessment for all policies and actions brought to Township Council. That happens in a lot of municipalities already. Whatever staff proposes to council has to show its climate risk and mitigation component. Next slide, please. Okay, we also need to test emergency preparedness related to weather extremes. I'm sure they wish they had done that in Texas. We have to consider remote work options wherever possible to reduce employee commutes. There's about 8% of people in Hamilton Township commute more than an hour a day. That's the largest number that, if that was part of a household Stats Canada study. And Hamilton Township could also pilot electric trucks wherever possible. To get the ball rolling, but that will be 1 or 2 years from now. Besides planting new trees, it's really important in the short term to maintain older trees in the forest canopy. They sequester a lot more carbon, and it takes a long time for a seedling or a sapling to catch up. We do need to keep planting trees, that's important, but we shouldn't be cutting down older trees unless they're diseased. So those are some of the measures, some of them quite big. That's why it's kind of daunting. We have to 2050 to be net zero, but we have to have at least flattened our trajectory in the next 10 years, or else we're going to cross over the 1.5 degree temperature rise. And that's where we're going to experience a lot more problems that we won't, even when we bring the temperature, even when we do the other things, and bring the temperature maybe back down, it's going to have already caused problems that we won't be able to stop. So of course, I'm interested in your ideas and thoughts and suggestions. And I leave it open for discussion at this point. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Judy. You've given us an awful lot to reflect on. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Great. Now we're back. I can see everyone here. So let me open the floor up to questions. Who would like to start off? Mark.
Question for you, Judy, dealing with, and I know it's more of a county issue than ours. Now that we are recycling and basically the truck's going by 3 times a week now, has there been any thought of going to every other week for garbage pickup and so forth? Because I mean, the amounts should be that much less, and it would probably encourage people to recycle more, knowing that they're only going to get picked up every other week instead of every week.
Okay. I know a lot of the bins are large enough that you don't have to put them out in a week. But I'd have to check with Adam McHugh and get back to you, Mark, on that, whether they have considered that. It's not something that I've asked him about, but I will ask him.
Thank you.
Hey.
This is really interesting information. A lot of it is not new, but some of it certainly is, as it's specifically to our township. I'm just wondering, in terms of process, Judy, and of course everybody, what do we do with this information within this committee? Has this presentation been given to Hamilton Township Council? Will they be getting back to us seeking our input on it? There's a lot here, in an enormous amount, but also some really great, I guess, goals. I mean, we kind of know what the goals are. I guess at this point, as a committee, we need to confirm those, strategize how to deal with that, and then perhaps suggest some action plans for which of these we can deal with. because otherwise it's going to be overwhelming, you know. So, I mean, I just throw that out there because you know, when you want to get something done, you want to see process. And that's why I open it up to, you know, because you're doing this with Coburg and with Hamilton Township and I suppose with the county as well.
Yeah, and Port Hope. Yes, and the advisory committees in all the towns have, you know, have a say in order to, and these are measures that could be adopted. Some of them with the county have already started. But with regard to Hamilton Township, they could be prioritized. There's other ones that could be added. Matter of fact, I left off the whole agriculture part that I realized I could have talked to as well. And I think it's a matter of what are you, I mean, these are suggested measures. We do, agriculture is a big one because of the township's in rural nature. But vehicles at the community level and buildings, particularly existing buildings, are the areas that till 2050 that we have to meet and become net zero with. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to start now. And with electrification, that's coming on. And there is education to be done there for electric vehicles. And for housing, that's a very complex area that we're just investigating, as are a number of other communities, and in terms of how to fund major building retrofits between now and 2050 so that the building stock is net zero. That's asking a lot. I mean, gas furnaces are being phased out by 2035. So, but you need the houses to be efficient before you go to heat pumps, or else you're putting in oversized equipment, and you're not protecting the public from heat waves and other extreme weather events that a well-insulated high-performance house will do. So there's a big safety and health component to this as well. Those are the two areas I'm most concerned about, along with agriculture. And we could talk about agriculture if you want, but there are a lot of other areas that could be addressed. I always keep in mind, though, that what the county's own operations represent is only 1% of the picture. So I don't focus as much on that at this point in time, because we've only got less than 10 years now. I mean, 10 years ago, we were focused on that, but nowadays it's too small to really be the focus. It has to be the bigger community that we need to address if we're going to have an impact.
Mark Burnham.
Yeah, I've got a few notes here.
Oh, I knocked him right off the page.
I can hear you now.
Oh,
So
Yeah,
I
you can-
had a
go
couple
ahead,
of
Mark.
notes there. Judy, when you mentioned that our Brighton landfill is going to start flaring methane,
They have
to me,
they have to put it in the budget. They haven't done that yet, but it's a proposal.
why don't they collect the methane and use it as a fuel source instead of flaring it, which is just creating heat and carbon dioxide? Like if you compress it and use it in, like you can simply convert a diesel or a gas engine to run off compressed methane, and it produces very clean fuel, and it costs almost pennies on compared to the rest of the equipment. It to me, that makes a lot more sense. And another source of methane could also be your sewage treatment plants, which also create methane in that treatment process. So
Yeah.
why aren't we collecting that methane instead of just flaring it, which is a waste of energy?
Yeah, they looked at both of those possibilities in Coburg. They looked at the waste treatment plant, and a company came in because Enbridge is looking for biogas to put into their stream to reduce the fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions. And
Because methane is essentially
there
natural
wasn't
gas.
enough. If they had combined, they have 2 waste treatment centers. If they had them at one location, they would have been able to do it. And the same with the landfill. They have a study from 2017 to look at putting in an it was for electric, to convert it to, energy from waste. But
Yeah, it doesn't take much to run through a generator.
yeah, and
But
apparently
like farms,
it
there
was
are dairy
also
farms that-
considered too expensive for what they would get from it. But,
so we're taking
maybe they
economics over
would,
the environment right now.
yeah, flaring, it makes a big difference. But yeah, it's not really using the methane that is collected. It's just, I'm not, and maybe because there's no benefit by flaring to the county, there's no profit from it. Maybe they just seem to think it's a money losing proposition, but maybe it'll go back into the mix. It's what I'm hearing is that I just want to see the methane not dissipated as methane. So if they
Well,
can.
I think this is your job, is to convince them to do better things than just reduce the emissions. Like you need to push for, you have to look past the dollars and cents and do what's right for the environment, not just what's easy and cheap. That's our whole problem with our society right now, is we just keep taking the easy, cheap solution.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I hadn't thought of it in comparison to the other studies that they had rejected. Well, the one that the county had rejected, they didn't reject it. They were just told it didn't make sense. I can perhaps share that study with you. Maybe you could have a look at it too. It might make more sense than just flaring.
Yes, John.
Yeah, so quite an interesting presentation, Judy. I noticed there was no mention in there about hydrogen as an alternative fuel for vehicles. I mentioned that because I'm concerned about switching everything to electric vehicles and how well the grid will be able to handle that.
Yeah, the hydrogen is mentioned as a liquid fuel for heavy vehicles. That's the only place I've put it in. With regard to the grid, there is we have no shortage of electricity, especially at night. In Ontario, we're actually paying Americans to take our electricity at night. That's when most electric vehicles are charged. 90% of them are charged at home at night. And when you look at the other improvements we're talking about with regard to building stock and the amount of electricity that's required for electric vehicles, we're not going to have a problem. I've talked to some technical experts about this. I could send you some material on that if you like, but it's not, but especially when you add in the building improvements, it's going to reduce electricity demand even more. And it might actually even go down. I've heard that component. Maybe I can get, Faye knows Ralph. Maybe I can get him to comment on that. I think, are you headed out? Ralph? Are you headed out?
Yeah, just gonna get the snow.
Oh, before you do, could you answer a question?
You're muted, Judy.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yes, we can now.
Okay, sorry. Here, can you sit down for a second?
Okay.
So, whoops. John Lyon, who knows a lot about vehicles, he's in the upper left-hand corner,
Hi, John.
was asking about the electric grid and the demand that would be put on it if we electrify all Ontario's vehicles going forward.
Oh, well, with the current technology for a personal car, the consumption runs around 20 kilowatt hours for every 100 kilometers. So that includes the losses in the charging. So I think that works out if someone's driving 20 or 25,000 K a year to somewhere around 4,000 kilowatt hours a year. So it's like a water heater. It's not small, but it's not as big as the space heating load, for example. I would have to do a calculation. I don't know off the top of my head what that adds up to for Ontario, but I guess if you multiply 4,000 kilowatt hours by how many households, how many cars in Ontario, maybe
Cars in Ontario,
Maybe,
it's about 1.8 or 1.6 per household. And households.
yeah, but they might not. Let's say you had 5 million just as a round number. So it'd be 5 million times 4,000 kilowatt hours, which would be, what's 4,000 times 5 million?
Oh, Ralph, I'm sorry. I thought you.
4,000 times 5 million would be 20 billion kilowatt hours. So that would be like 20 terawatt hours. So somewhere around 20 terawatt hours. So I'm doing this in my head, okay? And that's in a province that uses about 135 terawatt hours altogether per year. So it's manageable. And that's a big scenario. 5 million electric vehicles in Ontario means that most households would have one at that point. If you, the other issue is the effect that this might have on peak demand, which people worry about. And there the thinking is that the vehicles will be charged, they'll be plugged in at the end of the day when people get home, but they don't necessarily have to start getting charged up until after midnight. And so the bulk of the electric vehicle charging energy can be delivered when the grid is off peak, off its daily peak. In fact, there are some suggestions that during the peak, those electric cars that are plugged into the grid and which are not being used could actually give some of their battery energy back to help alleviate peak demand. And this would also be another source of income for the EV owner. So that's sort of a big picture. It'll be a significant new demand for electricity, but it's not a game changer It's not unmanageable. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15% of our total electricity demand.
Oh, I have another. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention.
Oh,
What was it?
It's heat pumps probably,
No.
how they use, okay. You can go show.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
I caught him on his way out the door to shovel snow. The other thing is, as we shift to heat pumps, they use, for 1 unit of electricity, they create another 2 free units. So the demand for energy from housing would actually go down. And so it does free up electricity for other uses. And if Toronto would switch their streetlights to LED, they're about the only place in Ontario that hasn't. Hamilton Township has, but that would free some electricity up too. That, I think that's an answer.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe and Judy. Any other questions? Yes, Pat.
I have a couple. Whenever I start researching or listening to presentations, I think of a number of people that I talk to that go to the, oh my goodness, this is too big of a problem, and they almost shut down. They're like, I'm not going to be able to really fix this anyway. And then you have, I've read an article recently that says 97% of scientists support the things we're hearing about climate change, but you have 3% very vocal about it. It's all in our heads. So that those people that are already scared, I think sometimes lean towards that. So I'd like to see us doing a larger component of small, simple educational things, which we talked about already, but things like when we do the focus is so big and legitimately scary, but for if you want to change, okay, let me stop for a second. If 1% of the township that we're talking about is actually the township facilities, the other 99%, trying to find ways to reach them, I think has to be, as our committee, one of our biggest priorities, because
Yeah.
those are the people that will facilitate the small changes within their own home.
Yeah.
That being said, my next question is passive housing. You're saying that you'd like to see that go to being essentially mandatory. Is there things, because I haven't seen anything come through at township level, I don't know if Mark has, about us pushing to have that as a building code requirement? Because like, I mean, it's not going to happen in the next year, but that's legislation that we should be trying to get moving forward now, because we can make the guidelines, we can make the recommendations at the building level, but if it's not part of the building code, we can't make people do it. And there's always a lag already between the legislation and getting people to already kick in. I was thinking about, I don't know if anyone else has run into this recently, but the changes that have been made to waste reduction, and I'm going to do, and to do your gray bin, your blue bin. There are people who are taking that on wholeheartedly. There's also a reasonable population that's going, now it's too hard, I'm throwing it all in the garbage. And I have talked to more than one person recently who has had exactly that attitude. So that scares me in a different level, in terms of just making it a rule isn't going to be enough either. So having said my piece, the couple of things that I had in my head was whether, as an advisory committee, we should be looking at writing up a resolution to send to other municipalities for this to be considered for building code. Because that's something practical we can do. Using our signboard for very simple messages about, if you turn off your lights, you save blah, blah, like just very small things. I think we still go after all the bigger stuff. I'm not saying, okay, just do little measures. But we have not just the township or the county, we have a real mindset problem that you've got the two extremes. You've got the people who are like, oh, this is really real, and we got to do everything. you've got the smaller group that are, no, it's not, and then the people who are just like this. We need to start digging away at that in any way we can. One of the things that happened at the township is that our fire department decided they were going to take on a bit of a challenge between the departments to use less energy. And they made within their department some significant impacts. Like this, and it was just something that the chief took on himself between the three departments. Can't give you any numbers, they're not in my head, but I remember going, look how well a small thing can work.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that we're going to think as much as possible of what small things that are not going to scare people so that they can be moving forward. My other one that you touched on the end was, again, I'm hoping Mark can help, must be numbers. I think that we are taking down 150 dead trees this year on the side of the road. Is that about right, Mark? The number? We haven't got in place, I don't think, for stuff that's roadside and dead, any kind of a replacement system in place. And I was thinking, again, I don't know how feasible it is, but we don't really want them replaced at roadside. And maybe we should be looking at a tree program for either new builds, or that new builds should need to have an X number of trees on their property, or we will supplement if you want to put in a, what you call, like the type of tree that's most useful. I have 3 huge trees in my front yard. Like, I don't know how tall they are, but they're big. We had to have a chunk of one taken down recently. But we planted them as small trees. And in, I don't know, 25 years, all of a sudden people are thinking, oh, they're 50 years old. But you need the starting point. And again, if it's just, like we'll pay a percentage up to how much money allotment we've got for this year's money, even as a, get people thinking that way.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
I think that's starting from the end point, and maybe other people want to, does somebody else want to address some of those things before I jump in?
I think Mark Levison.
If I could, I mean, I think Pam will bring a lot of that information when she comes to do her presentation, and perhaps we could get her to touch a little bit on what Port Hope does, because they do have a tree planting program, and it is along the roadside, but it is in consultation with the road supervisors and so forth, so that they're not in the way of snow removal, that kind of thing. So they do have a program there, and we do have one here within our own municipality that we do, I can tell you right now, is being well used through the Ganaraska. And I'm sure Pam's going to touch on that. I see them kind of firsthand because I'm part of the approval process of allowing whom gets what monies and so forth. And there's a pile of trees going in. There really is. I know there's some even going up in Elm. We had one application just come forward is on Elmick Hill Road. And I'm sure you're going to see a number of trees go up there in the near future. So there's always, every year, the Ganaraska chips in and helps people, not only through our program that the township gives, but through other programs that are available. And there's a pile of trees go in the municipality that a lot of us aren't aware of. And you may not see them in individual lots or individual, places of residence, but they are throughout. I can honestly say that.
If I may respond to that,
Sure.
I'm really happy to hear that, but that makes me think, along with the education, we should be doing more along the lines of celebrating what we are doing, so that people see that things are happening and differences are being made. Because I feel like I should have known that, but not just because Mark's on the committee, he has more information. But I'm thinking, if I don't know it, probably most of you did not know it. And again, when you think of the problem as so big and you don't think that people are already doing things about it, that causes another kind of dissonance within yourself about, okay, what's the point?
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. Mark Burnham.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well said, Pat, on let's focus on some small, easy things. And something that crossed my mind several times is clotheslines. People don't use clotheslines anymore. I think that's a largely due to the fact that there's bylaws in town saying you can't have a clothesline because it's ugly.
No, that's not allowed.
Because if you start looking at the energy,
That's not allowed.
yeah, if you start looking at the energy,
About 10 years ago, the province
What's it?
banned any municipality from making those kinds of bylaws. Anybody can put up a clothesline, except on higher buildings.
So-
That's the only thing.
so the bylaws have been, they're still standing.
Yeah, well, no, they're not. They were overruled by the province about 10 years ago. Do you
Okay.
know of any place that still has a anti-clothesline bylaw?
I'm just curious why no one has any clotheslines up, because you don't see any.
They're lazy.
Because the energy consumed by clothes dryers is massive.
Yeah,
But if the bylaws have been removed and it's not been publicized, you've got the same issue again, right? People think the bylaw's still in place, whether it is or
Exactly.
not.
Yeah.
I recognize the clerk.
That's where public education on your sign in front of the county building and any kind of advertising that Hamilton Township does. There's Sustainable Coburg is putting out a series of tips with the town and with Lakefront Utilities. And those tips, I'm sure they want to share them. They're nicely put together pieces of information that could go in an ad or something. Clotheslines were something we did a big push on over 10 years ago. Yeah, you got special savings and so on for clotheslines at local hardware stores and stuff. But
Just before I get to you,
there's a lot of
Shannon,
things you can do.
thank you, Judy. Just before I get to you, Shannon, I'm going to guess the clerk is going to point out the time.
No, it was.
Oh, okay.
No, it was just about the clotheslines. During my time in the planning department, what that was not a municipal bylaw, it was a subdivider's provision in the subdivision agreement. So to have an attractive subdivision development, they prohibited clotheslines. It would be the same as they had a lot of prohibitions in the subdivisions because they wanted to create a certain aesthetic to draw a certain client. So that's probably something that now in subdividers can't regulate something like that. So it would have been the subdividers, not the municipality.
Kate, are you aware of any ability to enforce that in light of the provinces having prohibited municipalities from implementing a bylaw?
Again, municipalities, to my knowledge, didn't implement the bylaw. It was the subdividers that did. And then those subdividers provisions ran for, let's say, the first 5 years or 10
Okay.
years of the subdivision. And
Very
then it was ended.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Shannon, you
welcome.
had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I absolutely as well support like education on things that people can do, but I also think, at least in my reading and research, that the reality is that like 71% of greenhouse gases are being created by 100 corporations right now. So there's a bit of a like telling people to compost their food or whatever because it's our fault that everything's ruined is kind of it's not a real thing. It's so I would like to see, as much as I do think it's important we're all doing our share and we're all trying to do our bit, I really think my hope with this committee is that we're helping to equip council with information to make real big policy moves forward that certainly are not about just the 1% of the township buildings and vehicles do, but that get funding and policy measures out that make big community changes. That's what I'm hoping we do. But alongside with education stuff that people can take on right now, I think is fabulous personally.
Thank you very much. Faye, did I see your hand up as well?
Yeah, Pat, I really appreciate the comments that you made because I think you're bang on. When I take a look at the 12 or 15 actual things that are being proposed here, I think some of them are can be done relatively quickly and relatively inexpensively, particularly that educational piece. There's certainly the pieces that are dealing with the building code requirement is something that we could be working on at a local level as well. But I think monitoring is also important. And I think reward is also important here, particularly on the residential level, because what people who have been involved with the environment the last, I don't know, I want to say maybe 10 years or so, is that more and more people are becoming aware of how important this is and why it's important. And that's why, you know, Judy's programs always start with that. And so that educational piece, some people just haven't received yet, and they need to receive that piece because it's like environmental protection is coming out of the closet finally and is becoming mainstream. And I think that is so important to get us going in the right track so that the residents are supportive of the funds it's going to take to retrofit our buildings, our township buildings, what it's going to take to, as we're buying new vehicles, to make them green vehicles and those kinds of things. I don't think it's going to take a giant step to get our residents to support this, but the more people who support it, the better. So we as a township need to get on board to make this so acceptable and so mainstream. So I really appreciate, Pat, you know, the comments that you've said, including, you know, we need to celebrate what we're doing, reward the positive things. So I guess from this presentation, I would like to know, is this going to be made to Township Council? Is it going to be made to Township staff? Because I think that's really important. And also as a committee, are we going to maybe decide what we're going to do with this, you know, how we as a group are going to do with these, you know, 15 recommendations. That's what I'd like to put under new business, actually.
Okay, thank you, Faye. And I am sensitive to the fact that our deadline is 6 minutes hence. You had indicated that you wanted something under new business. Might I just offer a thought to the question you've just posed, that each of us as individuals, perhaps if you find a moment or two, should jot down their thoughts and responses to Judy's presentation. And if you want to take the next step and reflecting on what Pat said, separate them into the things that we can do quickly and easily, the little bites of the elephant we can do without trying to devour the whole thing all at once, and prioritize the 15 recommendations that Judy has offered to us. If we did that, we could create a spot on the agenda for the next meeting or the meeting afterwards, depending on our time constraints next month, and digest that down into an action plan. Our terms of reference do include both coming up with advice to Township Council, but also the educational outreach to the broader community as well, working with the Township Council to accomplish that. And so I would invite your feedback, your reflections. Maybe there are some additional steps you'd like us to take. And we can circle back around and coalesce the individual comments at the next or the subsequent meeting to that. If there's no disagreement, I'd like to cut off the questions at this point. Again, now we're down to 4 minutes. Faye, you had something you wanted to raise as new business?
Actually, that is what I wanted to raise as new business, as what are we going to do with Judy's piece? And I think if everybody's agreeable, I like your suggestions, and if we could share those before the next meeting, and like as far in advance of the next meeting as possible, because I think it's a really worthwhile endeavor to read what everybody has to say, because there's probably going to be some consensus on that. The other thing that I was just going to add to that is I want people to consider the Ontario Environmental Registry, because right now we as a committee, or the township as a whole, obviously can be making submissions to the Ontario Environmental Registry, and particularly on proposed legislation that affects our community. And the other thing that I'd like to throw out as well is, Judy had mentioned the concern about the electrification plants that are run by gas. And the Ontario Climate Action Committee is asking municipalities to support bans on gas-fired electrical generating plants. So that's something that I'd like to throw out to the committee to take a look at. And maybe that's something, you know, Judy said that you could comment on that. Maybe that's something that we could hear from you at another time. Because the more municipalities that support that, obviously, that's going to make a dent in what the province does.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to make that as actually the first part as a motion, move that the committee members submit their thoughts to the clerk within whatever time frame you think is reasonable, for the purposes of bringing back or circulating the compendium of all those thoughts to the committee members before the next meeting? Not to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
But the chair shouldn't make motions. So
I'll make that motion, and I'm wondering, is maybe 2 weeks, and then we have 2 weeks if we share in 2 weeks, and then we have 2 weeks before we meet to put our thoughts together. I mean, does that make sense?
okay, that's the motion on the floor. Do we have a seconder? John Lyon. Thank you, John. All in favor?
Oh,
Contrary of any? That motion carries. Thank you. So if we could all put in our thoughts. Faye's just given me a delightful one to get in, because I'll tease you with this, Faye. There wouldn't be a wind or solar plant in this province if there wasn't an equivalent number of megawatts of gas, because they are both so unreliable that if you didn't have that, you might as well not have them at all. So that's why we have gas, and not that I'm in favor of them, but if you want wind and solar, you have to have an equivalent number of megawatts, because you don't know when it's going to be windy. And
Yeah.
and you certainly know the sun's going to go down at
yeah.
right now, 6 o'clock at night. So
Yeah, it can be hooked up to the Quebec hydro grid, and the hydropower there can be used as a storage mechanism for.
Judy, you're absolutely right. It could happen. Quebec has been asked to
That's the
sell that
plan.
power for 20 years and has said, no, thanks, we're getting a better price than the Americans. So
Yeah.
I think
They
we
still have.
need to focus, if I might suggest, we need to focus on things we can control here in Hamilton Township, within the context of the broader world, absolutely. But I think, might I just suggest, I think Judy's given us an awful lot to work with already on our plate before we take on projects that extend beyond our actual terms of reference, which are very, very specific. They
Yeah.
aren't lobbying outside the township. They are environmental advocacy within the township and environmental advice to help inform the council when they have specific actions to undertake. So
Well, we can take a look at that and argue that point, I suppose.
absolutely, we can always change and we can change, or the council can change the terms of reference. That nothing's off the table. But as I say, I think Judy's given us enough already that I suspect we can be kept busy for quite some time.
Yeah,
Dealing with the various challenges she's laid out before us.
yeah.
So with that, is there any other new business? Madam Deputy Clerk, I guess I stepped in a bit of a cow pie when I blithely said yes to March 29th, considering our agenda action, which we had already approved, said March 22nd. So I think our earlier discussion would suggest we've agreed that March 29th would be the next meeting, not March 22nd.
Yes,
Is that
sir. I'll make
correct?
that. Yep, I will make that change in the minutes.
Okay, if that still works for everyone. And if that is the case, then so at our next meeting, 10:30 a.m., March 29th, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Pat, seconded by Mark Burnham. Thank you very much. So the meeting is adjourned at 12:02. Certainly look forward to seeing you all next month. All the best. See you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thank you. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.